Preislamic Near East, an overview. Background of the Arabian Peninsula. The Arabian Peninsula is a large land bridge suspended between Africa and Asia. It is among the largest peninsulas on Earth and is surrounded by water on three sides. To the north lies Syria. To the west, it forms a coast to the Red Sea. To the east is the Persian Gulf, and to the south is the Arabian Sea, which is also part of the Indian Ocean. About 3/4 of the Arabian Peninsula is covered by deserts. Geographers think that the region had changed from savanna or grasslands to desert by about 8,000 BCE, along with the neighboring Sahara Desert in North Africa. Artifacts from hunter-gatherer groups and early settled cultures have been found at many sites. Traces of the earliest towns, cities, and civilizations in the Fertile Crescent along the Mediterranean Sea have also been found. The Arabian Peninsula was mostly arid and inhospitable terrain, with fertile regions nearly all around the periphery. Along the mountainous Arabian Sea coast to the south, rain-fed and irrigated highland areas support a rich agriculture. These mountains continue up to the Red Sea coast, but they do not receive the monsoon rains and are mostly arid. The narrow Isthmus of Suez near the Sinai Peninsula joins the Arabian Peninsula to Africa. Today, the Suez Canal cuts through that connection, allowing ships to pass from the Mediterranean into the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. The peninsula is connected to Asia from the Mediterranean coast along the Tigris-Euphrates river system to the head of the Persian Gulf. Arabia is part of a region geographers now call Southwest Asia. One can see the Arabian Peninsula at the center of the Eastern Hemisphere's continents and waterways. It forms a land bridge between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, and a crossroads between Africa, Asia, and Europe. The Arabian Peninsula is at the center of a huge region of desert stretching from North Africa to Central Asia, called the Great Arid Zone. People settled in areas where they could farm and herded flocks of sheep and goats in areas where they could graze on seasonal plants. During the first millennium BCE, domestication of the camel allowed pastoral nomads to inhabit even more arid parts of the peninsula. More important, the camel allowed people to cross the driest deserts between wells. Camels can travel at a steady rate and withstand the harsh desert climate for long periods without drinking. The Arabs were skillful in transporting goods safely across the wide, barren stretches, guided by signs of nature just as mariners navigated the seas. Seaports along the Arabian coasts linked the peninsula with the Mediterranean trading system, the Indian Ocean, and Africa. Towns at caravan stops at oases developed along the trade routes, such as inland towns of Makkah and Medina and the older town of Ubars. In the northern part of the peninsula, cities such as Jericho, Jerusalem, and Damascus developed during biblical times. During classical times, city-states like Palmyra and Petra grew wealthy from trade on the eastern end of the Asian Silk Roads. Although the inner regions of the Arabian Peninsula were too difficult to conquer, the caravan routes and their towns in the region were not completely isolated. Arabian camel cavalry fought in imperial armies for the Persians and the Romans. Improvements in the camel saddle during the early centuries of the Common Era increased their strength as a military force and gave them control of the caravan trade. Nomadic herders, settled farmers, and townspeople shared interdependent society. They depended upon one another for food, defense, and trade. Herders supplied meat, milk, and leather from their animals. Farmers supplied grain for bread as well as dates. Traders needed desert guides and pack animals, and all three groups benefited from long-distance trade goods like silk, wool and cotton cloth, spices, perfumes, jewels, gold, silver, and iron goods. The wealth of the townspeople gave them a leading position, which could still be challenged by the desert warriors. Pastoral nomads became guides for townspeople, acting as a shipping service for merchant economic conditions in the Near East, skilled warriors and riders before the dawn of Islam for the caravans. Political conditions. Arabian Peninsula was as a land bridge among the waterways that connect Arabia before Islam, where was caravan the complete absence of a political organization in any form. With the exception of Yemen in the southwest, no part of the Arabian Peninsula had any government at any time, and the Arabs never acknowledged any authority other than the authority of the chiefs of their tribes. The authority of the tribal chiefs, however, rested, in most cases, on their character and personality, and was moral rather than political. The modern student of history finds it incredible that the Arabs lived, generation after generation, century after century, without a government. Since there was no government, there was no law and order. The only law of the land was lawlessness. In the event a crime was committed, the injured party took law in its own hands and tried to administer justice to the offender. This system
Vendetta
often
consumed
led
whole
to the
generations
acts
of
horrendous
Arabs.
cruelty.
Since there were no system of police,
Systems of Arabia.
courts, or judges,
If
the
an
only
Arab ever
protection a man
exercised
could
any
find from his
modicum of
enemies
restraint,
was in his own
it was not
tribe.
because of any
The tribe had an obligation to protect its members,
right or wrong,
even if they had
but because
committed
of
crimes.
the fear of provoking
Tribalism,
reprisals
or
and
asabiya,
vendetta.
the clan spirit, took precedence over ethics. A tribe that failed to protect its members from their enemies exposed itself to ridicule, obloquy, and contempt. Ethics, of course, did not enter the picture anywhere. Wars. Since Arabia did not have a government, and since the Arabs were anarchists by instinct, they were locked up in incessant warfare. War was a permanent institution of the Arabian society. The desert could support only a limited number of people, and the state of intertribal war maintained a rigid control over the growth of population. Eternal peace held no appeal for them, and war provided an escape from drudgery and from the monotony of life in the desert. They, therefore, courted the excitement of the clash of arms. War gave them an opportunity to display their skills at archery, fencing, and horsemanship. And also in war they could distinguish themselves by their heroism, and at the same time win glory and honor for their tribes. In many cases, the Arabs fought for the sake of fighting. Describing this state of continuous warfare, G.E. von Grunebaum remarks, "In the century before the rise of Islam, the tribes dissipated all their energies in tribal guerrilla fighting, all against all." Classical Islam and History 600 to 1258 to 1970, according to D.S. Margoliouth enumerates, Arabia would have remained pagan had there been a man in Mecca who could strike a blow, who would act. But many, as were Muhammad's ill-wishers, there was not one of them who had this sort of courage, and as has been seen, there was no magistracy by which he could be tried. Muhammad and the Rise of Islam, 1931.
Social conditions. Arabia was a male-dominated society. Women had no status of any kind other than as sex objects. The number of women a man could marry was not fixed. When a man died, his son inherited all his wives except his own mother. A savage custom of the Arabs was to bury their female infants alive. Even if an Arab did not wish to bury his daughter alive, he still had to uphold this honorable tradition, being unable to resist social pressures. Vices.
Drunkenness was a common vice of the Arabs. With drunkenness went their gambling. They were compulsive drinkers and compulsive gamblers. The relations of the sexes were extremely loose. Many women sold sex to make their living, since there was little else they could do. Social position of women. Social position of women. Amongst the Arab, woman was just like merchandise which could be bought and sold, and did not possess any individual or social rights, not even the right of inheritance. The enlightened persons among them put women under the category of animals and for this very reason considered her to be one of the chattels and necessities of life. Social position of women. Treatment with daughters. Usually, on account of fear of famine and occasionally dreading embarrassment, they beheaded their daughters on the very first day of their birth, or hurled them down from a high mountain into a deep valley, or at times drowned them in water. According to the Holy Quran, and when one of them is informed of the birth of a female, his face becomes dark and he suppresses grief. Surah Nahl 58. He hides himself from the people because of the ill of which he has been informed. Should he keep it in humiliation or bury it in the ground? Unquestionably, evil is what they decide. Surah Nahl 59. For those who do not believe in the hereafter is the description of evil, and for Allah is the highest attribute, and He is exalted in might, the wise. Surah Nahl 60. At another place, God has asked, and when the girl who was buried alive is asked for what sin she was killed. Surah Taqir 8-9. Most deplorable of all things was their marriage system, which was not based on any law. For example, they did not believe in any limit in the number of wives. To avoid payment of dowry, they maltreated women. In the event of the death of a person or his divorcing his wife, it was treated as lawful for his son to marry her, and the story of Umayyah bin Shams in this regard is preserved in the pages of history. When a woman obtained divorce from her husband, her right of second marriage was dependent on the permission by the first husband, and such a permission was usually accorded on her surrendering her dowry. Cultural Arabic poetry. Arabic poetry was rich in eloquence and imagery, but it was limited in range and was lacking profundity. Its content might be interesting, but it was stereotyped. The masterpieces of their poetry followed almost exactly the same sequence of ideas and images. It was nevertheless a faithful mirror of life in ancient Arabia. Also, in cultivating the art of poetry, the Arab poets were, unconsciously, developing one of the greatest artifacts of mankind, the Arabic language. The greatest compositions of the pagan Arabs were the so-called Golden Odes, a collection of 7 poems, supposedly of unsurpassed excellence in spontaneity, power, and eloquence. Religious condition. The period in the Arabian history which preceded the birth of Islam is known as the times of ignorance. Judging by the beliefs and the practices of the pagan Arabs, it appears that it was a most appropriate name. The Arabs were the devotees of a variety of religion, which can be classified into the following categories. Social position of women. 1. Idol worshippers or polytheists. Most of the Arabs were idolaters. They worshipped numerous idols, and each tribe had its own idol or idols and fetishes. They had turned the Kaaba in Makkah, which had been built by the prophet Abraham alayhis salam, and his son Ishmael alayhis salam, and was dedicated by them to the service of one God, into a heathen pantheon housing 360 idols of stone and wood. 2. Atheists. This group was composed of the materialists who believed that the world was eternal. Zindigs. They were influenced by the Persian doctrine of dualism in nature. They believed that there were 2 gods representing the twin forces of good and evil, or light and darkness, and both were locked up in an unending struggle for supremacy. 4. Sabines. They worshipped the stars. 5. Jews. When the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD and drove the Jews out of Palestine and Syria, Many of them found new homes in Hijaz, in Arabia. Under their influence, many Arabs also became converts to Judaism. Their strong centers were the towns of Yathrib, Khyber, Fadak, and Qura. 6. Christians. The Romans had converted the North Arabian tribe of Ghassan to Christianity. Some clans of Ghassan had migrated to and had settled in Hijaz. In the south, there were many Christians in Yemen, where the creed was originally brought by the Ethiopian invaders. Their strong center was the town of Najran. Economic conditions. Economically, the Jews were the leaders of Arabia. They were the owners of the best arable lands in Hijaz, and also the best farmers in the country. They were also the entrepreneur of the industries that existed in Arabia in those days, and they also enjoyed a monopoly of the armaments industry. Slavery. Slavery was an economic institution of the Arabs. Male and female slaves were sold and bought like animals, and they formed the most depressed class of the Arabian society. People. The most powerful class of the Arabs comprised the capitalists and moneylenders. The rates of interest which they charged on loans were exorbitant and were especially designed to make them richer and richer, and the borrowers poorer and poorer. Social position of women. Trade. The most important urban centers of Arabia were Mecca and Yathrib, both in Hijaz. The citizens of Mecca were mostly merchants, traders, and moneylenders. Their caravans traveled in summer to Syria and in winter to Yemen. They also traveled to Bahrain in the east and to Iraq in the northeast. The caravan trade was basic to the economy of Mecca, and its organization called for considerable skill, experience, and ability. According to R.V.C. Bodley, the arrivals and departures of caravans were important events in the lives of the Meccans. Almost everyone in Mecca had some kind of investment in the fortunes of the thousands of camels, the hundreds of men, horses, and donkeys which went out with hides, raisins, and silver bars, and came back with oils, perfumes, and manufactured goods from Syria, Egypt, and Persia, and with spices and gold from the south. The Messenger, 1946, page 31. E. A. Belyayev notes, usury, riba, was widely practiced in Mecca, for in order to participate in the profitable caravan trade, many a Meccan who had only a modest income had to resort to usurers. Despite the high interest, he could hope to benefit after the safe return of the caravan. The richer merchants were both traders and usurers. Arabs, Islam and the Arab Caliphate in the early Middle Ages, 1969. Education among the Arabs before Islam. Among the Arabs, there were extremely few individuals who could read and write. Most of them were not very eager to learn these arts. Some historians opine that the culture of the period was almost entirely oral. The Jews and the Christians were the custodians of the knowledge which Arabia had. The greatest intellectual accomplishment of the pagan Arabs was their poetry. They claimed that God had bestowed the most remarkable qualities of the head upon the Greeks. Its proof is their science and philosophy. Of hand upon the Chinese, its proof is their craftsmanship. And of the tongue upon the Arabs, its proof is their eloquence. Their greatest pride, both before and after Islam, was their eloquence and poetry. The importance of poetry to them can be gauged by the following testimony. According to D.S. Margoliouth, in nomad Arabia, the poets were part of the war equipment of the tribe. They defended their own and damaged hostile tribes by the employment of a force which was supposed indeed to work mysteriously, but which in fact consisted in composing dexterous phrases of a sort that would attract notice, and would consequently be diffused and remembered widely. Muhammad and the Rise of Islam, 1931. Social position of women.